From Riverbend Church in Austin, Texas, this is Real Life with Dr. Gerald Mann. Today on Real Life, more from Christianity 101, back to the basics for a new millennium. Our subject, getting right with God.
The highest stage of spiritual development, and listen to this, is love of self for God's sake. Taking the self that God has given you and saying, wow, it's okay to be me.
That's all today on Real Life.
Today I want to talk about how to get right with God, what I believe about how we get right and stay right with God. And I want to use two verses from Luke, the 9th chapter, verse 23. Jesus is speaking, and he said, "All who want to be right with me must deny themselves, carry their crosses daily, and submit to me. For whoever holds on to life will lose it, and whoever loses their life for me will gain it." What I believe about how we get right with God. A few years back, I got this letter from somebody who watched us on television. Said, "I'm a baby boomer, with all that term implies. Went to Vietnam to defend the American way, became disillusioned. Then I made Woodstock and all of the stops in between. I tuned in, turned on, and dropped out. Then I sobered up, cut my hair, got married, went to college, joined the ranks of the middle class. Now I have 2.3 children and a mortgage, and I need to get right with God. I believe He exists, but I am suspicious of organized religion. You are the only minister I've ever written to. Either you're a big fake or somewhat of a real guy. Anyway, tell me how to get right with God. Please do not give me any canned spiels. I understand and know the Roman road, the 4 spiritual laws, and the sinner's prayer. I need some real talk from a real sinner. That's why I chose you." What a compliment. How do you get right with God? I answered him 2 things. First, I said there are many ways to experience God. There is no one-size-fits-all way of experiencing God. There are many ways. And there are 4 major categories that I would like to talk about. One, I'll use the word revolution. Some people experience God by revolution. They're going down the road one way, they have no intention of doing anything for God, and God sort of swoops them up. If you read in the Bible about Jacob, he had such an experience. You know, he was a twin. He was the second to be born. He came out of the womb holding his brother Isaac's heel. And they named him Heel Grabber, which means somebody who trips people by sneaking up behind them. And he lived up to that name, as you well know. He stole the birthright from his brother. He went to get away from his brother's wrath to live in a foreign country, and he married the daughter of a wealthy man and ended up getting almost all of the man's wealth. And then he got his wealth and his wives and his kids, and he was fleeing back from the angry father-in-law to where he came from, and he heard that his long-lost brother was on his way to meet him. And so he takes all of his wives, first the one that he likes the least, and he puts her out in the front with her children, and then he stair-steps them back thinking that maybe his brother will, after shedding so much blood, will go easy on him. He tries to go to sleep that night, and he has a dream, a nightmare actually, and he wrestles with an angel. And at daylight, he realizes that he's been wrestling with God. And his name and his life are changed in that moment. He is no longer Jacob, the heel snatcher. He is now Israel, man of God. On rare occasions, we experience God as a revolution in our lives. These are real experiences. I know that's true because that's the way my experience came about. I was not looking for God. I didn't want God. God abducted me. He just sort of kidnapped me and said, "I have chosen you." These experiences are real. They can happen to you if they haven't. But they are also rare, and they usually cause trouble. Because when somebody has an experience like that, when I had my experience, I assumed that everybody met God the same way, and I was trying to enforce my experience on everybody else. It doesn't happen that way. There is a second way we experience God, and I call it evolution. There are people who are born in a religious atmosphere. God is never very far away from them. I'm thinking of Samuel in the Old Testament. His mother prayed for him when he was born. She dedicated him to God. When he was weaned, she took him to the priest, Eli, and gave him over to the things of God. He was never very far away from God. And many of you who grow up in the church are that way. And I think that's the most common way of experiencing God. In our family, we have what I call the sweet spirits and the rebels. And I'm not going to name any names, but I and one of my children are rather rebellious. We have to learn the hard way. But my wife and one of our children have never been far from God. It's just a matter of sort of evolution, progressive, normal thing. That's how most people meet God. Another way of meeting God is by experimentation. There's some people who simply try it, experiment with it, and it works. Abraham was that way, the father of all of our fathers, the father of our faith. He lived in a strange land. He worshiped other gods, and God made himself known. And he said, I tell you what you do, Abraham, just try me. I will bless you, and I will make you a blessing to others. Just try it and see if it works. Several years ago in our church, we had an attorney join with a wife and 3 kids, a lovely family. And he said, I want you to know that I want to join your church, but I'm an agnostic. Is that going to be a problem? I said, well, not if we don't tell anybody. A few years later, he came back and said, I want to be baptized because I have acted myself into a way of thinking. I read the Sermon on the Mount. I read the 10 Commandments. I started practicing. And he said, you know, that stuff works by experimentation. And he said, I want to be baptized. It's better sometime to act yourself into a way of thinking than to think yourself into a way of acting. So you can meet God by experimentation. A fourth one, and then I'll move on, is what we call elimination. Some people come to know God because they've tried all the false gods who failed them. We have over 1,000 people in our church who are recovering in the 12-step program. The 12-step program is a grand example of coming to God by the process of elimination. You worship all the other gods, and you finally realize that I'll try this one because all the other ones have failed me. The first step of the 12 steps is I came to believe that I was powerless over alcohol and my life was unmanageable. And the second step is I came to believe there was a power higher than myself that could restore me to sanity. And the third step is I made a decision to turn my life and my will over to the God of my understanding. I made a decision. You see, that's coming to God by the process of elimination. So, first thing I told the man was there are many ways to know God. But knowing God, experiencing God, and getting right with God, 2 different things. There is only one way to get right and to stay right with God. It doesn't matter how you came to know Him. And it's contained in that passage that I quoted a moment ago, a harsh, harsh passage where Jesus said, whoever wants to come after me, let them deny themselves, take up their cross daily, and follow me. Well, first time I read that, I thought, that is the last thing that we in American mentality would ever want to do. Self-denial? Are you kidding? I didn't want to deny myself. When I first read that, I thought to be a Christian meant to take all the things that are fun in your life and deny yourself, that it was self-punishment. It took me years to realize that's not what Jesus is talking about at all. What does it mean to deny yourself? We all have some little liars buried in our psyches, some false selves, some imposters, some downright liars. And as long as we listen to those inner selves that are not real, our lives are lost. Let me give you an illustration from my personal experience. Those of you who've heard me speak for any length of time know that I have a sort of addiction to adding hair to my stories. One of my grandchildren said to me one time after telling a story in a sermon, was that true or are you just preaching? And through a very painful process, I discovered the truth about myself. That somewhere in my early childhood, there was a little neon sign planted in my psyche that said, no good unless embellished. If you really let people know who you are, the real you, they won't like you. If you let them know how frightened you are and how lonely you are and how much you want to be loved by them, they will not accept somebody like you. Not good unless embellished. Now, we're talking about the essence of sin. Every one of us has a little liar or a number of liars. I have a legion of them. And Jesus said, unless you deny those false voices and put them on the cross, and I'm so glad he added daily, because they don't seem to die very easy, do they? They just keep coming back. They just keep on coming back, and it's a process. To deny yourself does not mean to give up something good. It means to say no to the things within you that drive you to do the things that are wrong and destructive in your life. That's what it means. There's a word I guess I'm going to have to use. To get right with God, to stay right with God, always requires surrender. Surrender of my false self, my pride, my self-centeredness to the will of God. And Jesus said an amazing things happens when you do that. If you stop holding on to these false selves and surrender them up, you gain life. You see, God made us and He knows exactly who we are. The cross, my friends, means business. God gave His Son so that you and I don't have to pretend we're something we aren't. And the greatest freedom in the world is when we really reveal ourselves and say, it's okay to be me. St. Bernard said there are 4 stages of spiritual growth. The first stage is love of self for self's sake. That's the complete egotist, surrounded north, south, east, and west by self. The second stage, he said, is love of God for self's sake, and that's where most of us are. We love God for what we can get out of it. The third stage was very surprising when I read it. He said it's to love God for God's sake, and I would have thought that was the highest stage of spiritual development. He said, no, you can see a sunset or something God has done, and you can say, wow, that's great, God, and you love God for what God has done. But the highest stage of spiritual development, and listen to this, is love of self for God's sake. Taking the self that God has given you and saying, wow, it's okay to be me. In fact, it's wonderful to be me, and I don't have to be anywhere else or any place else. Now, folks, that's freedom. You'll run into 100 people this week who will be trying to embellish their stories and trying to impress you. And you'll catch yourself trying to do that as well. And so will I, unfortunately. Thank God that I'm okay like I am, and God give me the grace to come to love myself the way God loves me. And how does He love me? The cross tells me every day that I must crucify my false selves so that I can know myself as God meant for me to be. How do you get right with God? It doesn't matter how you came to know Him, by revolution or evolution or experimentation or elimination. The way you came to know God is not the important thing. The important thing is how to get right with Him, and that comes by surrender. C.S. Lewis said, all genuine religious conversions are blessed defeats. Stop running from God. Stop trying to bend God to your will, and show yourself to Him, and He will be there to love you. If that ain't good news, there ain't no good news. For all of us here at Real Life and Riverbend Church in Austin, Texas, this is Gerald Mann inviting you to join us next time. Thanks for watching, and God's best to you.